Hello and welcome to the February edition of Monthly Report, a podcast series where we discuss the main economic events of the previous month. My name is Daniel Fernandes and this is Connected, a podcast of Nova Economics Club.
The ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro.
Is that he were rather the poor were poorer.
This can be the most important step we could take to prevent another recession.
Today, our guests are Inês Coelho, Diogo Conceição, and Daniel Silva, all Nova SBA students and members of Nova Economics Club. Today's topics are TAP's restructuring plan, online schooling, and, as our introductory topic, Mario Draghi and the Italian government.
During the pandemic, the government was led by Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and supported by four parties: the Five Stars Movement, the Italian Democratic Party, Liberi e Uguali, and Italia Viva. Even though the government managed properly the first wave of the pandemic, the second wave management was heavily criticized. The main factor that destabilized the government equilibrium was that the Five Stars Movement and Italia Viva had different ideas on how to manage the pandemic. Since the President of the Republic, Sergio Mattarella, could not build a new government from a unified political movement, he named Mario Draghi. The policy concerns of the new Prime Minister are a more rapid vaccination rollout, a huge investment conveyed in the education sector, and other important structural reforms.
Diogo, do you think that Mario Draghi will be able to put in place the right economic measures and at the same time cope with high political
I think that the main problem, or actually the political fragmentation won't be really a problem per se, in the sense that Italy has been known for a lot of political fragmentation and political instability. So they're at their 67th government since World War II, and that's a lot of governments. 1.4 average governments per year since World War II. So instability is kind of in the core of Italian politics in general. So I'd say that wouldn't be the problem, at least from the start. And another thing that is in favor of Mario Draghi for correcting that problem is that he was able to gather a really diverse cabinet, right? So he has four ministers from the Five Star Movement, three from Lega, three from Forza Italia, etc., etc., etc. And even though 8 of them, apart from Mario Draghi himself, 8 of them are fully independent, and those are the ones that are in charge of the most important ministries, it is still a very diverse cabinet. So I think that Mario Draghi has gathered the necessary conditions for a strong government. If it will succeed or not, that's a bit more tricky to predict. But at least the instability part, which is the most pressing and the most the one that led to the fall of the previous government, I think has a lot of potential to be covered and for not being that much of a problem right now. In terms of implementing economic measures and helping Italy get out of the whole problem it is right now, I think that Mario Draghi has proven as president of the ECB, as president of the Bank of Italy, he has proven that he has what it takes to lead in difficult situations. So I'd say that he seems one of the best, if not the best, candidate for the job and for taking this role right now. If he will succeed or not, I think it's not just up to Italy's government, it's a lot up to the European Union and the world as a whole, how countries will react and get out of the recession that's coming in the following years or months.
Okay, thank you, Diogo. Inês, Mario Draghi expects a slow economic recovery, and he also expressed his willingness to protect the share of people who are not going to be employed. Do you think this is a good idea?
So first of all, hi everyone, thank you for having me. So in my opinion, one of the fundamental roles of a government is to protect its people. And in times like this, where we are in a huge crisis, it's even more important to support these people. So I do believe that Mario Draghi should help these people not only with subsidies and reforms, but also by using and making sure that the money used in the European bazooka is invested in sectors that are sustainable and that will bring an economic growth for Italy and maybe will create opportunities for these people and for the Italian economy as a whole. So yes, I do believe it is a good thing.
But I mean, there's a lot of, well, like the main thing that led to the fallout of the previous government was exactly what to do with those funds. And while Conte wanted to give subsidies to people, Mario Renzi wanted to invest. So isn't it kind of still the same question? Like, isn't it still the same problem in terms of future versus present? How do you balance that?
I mean, I think the question here is how you apply the investment you do. So if the investment is done in areas that will for sure provide an economic growth, like for instance in the energy sector, that is like it will for certain bring a win situation. It could help Italy improve and bring more opportunities and to create growth. So I do believe that there should be a balance and we shouldn't have only one of them or the other. But it is important to know where to apply the investment and where to apply the subsidies and to make it efficient for everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Inês. Thank you, Diogo, again. Daniel, which economic measure besides the vaccine rollout do you think Mario Draghi should prioritize?
Well, first of all, hello everyone. I have to agree with what Inês said and what the question initially was, that the help to the initiative to help people who lost their jobs should be hand in hand with the vaccine rollout, and people who lost their income and people who lost something due to the pandemic. But besides that, which is kind of straightforward, I guess, I believe that one of the measures that should be applied within other European countries and overall the world should be a fund to the educational system, which, if I'm not mistaken, is also one of the priorities. So I think it's a good measure, because the educational system will be shattered, it already is fragmented. So I believe that there should be some kind of initiative to develop sort of cure to this fragmentation of the educational system.
Online learning was already a reality before the pandemic. However, during this time, the consumers of online learning changed. Previously, they were mainly adults interested in learning new skills for their life through courses provided by Google or edX. Now, online classes are a reality for all children as well. Recent studies from University of Minho showed that students have been decreasing their learning time due to online schooling. Students with high performance decreased it by 3.7 hours, and students with low performance decreased it by 4.1 hours, increasing the gap between students even more. Besides, it is undeniable that online learning raises inequality, as students who don't have enough financial resources do not have the ability to keep up with their studies the same way as a wealthier student.
Danielle, do you believe that the poor preparation of these terms, online schooling, will have negative effects not only on the short term but also on the long term? And do you think that online schooling increases social inequalities?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that although we have been confined, and not only us in Portugal but other countries, for maybe 1 term, 2 terms, many believe that the effect of not going physically to schools is actually worse than 1 term, meaning that even if we stayed at home 1 term, we will not only lose that term in the educational system, but we'll lose even more. There was a study in the Netherlands that tried to quantify this loss, and have in mind that the Netherlands is a country that is considered well prepared for this type of situation, and the students are well prepared with the conditions, with everything necessary to this. And that study concluded that for each month on online schooling, the student actually lost 1 month of education. So this is in a country where everything should be at its finest. So if we take this fact into other countries that might not be as well prepared, for example Portugal, we'll have come to the conclusion that we are losing even more than just this term. We are losing much more. It's still not quantifiable, but soon it will be. And besides, many believe that to have an online class, you only need a computer and an internet connection. Well, this is because when students go to school, there are some certain conditions that are taken for granted. For example, a healthy meal once a day, quality study spaces, social connections with colleagues and professors. So when we take that out from going physically to the school and we put that in terms of being at home, many students, especially in Portugal, do not gather the necessary conditions to have a healthy learning, an efficient learning. And this can be especially seen on Professor Susana Peralta report on Portugal's condition, where she and other professors of Nova SB talk about the current situation in Portugal, and they come to the conclusion that many families don't gather necessary conditions to have online schooling for their kids. That being, the kids actually doesn't even have an healthy meal. The kid doesn't have a good quality space to study. Doesn't have actually sunlight, which is really important, the sun in studying. Yeah. So I recommend to everyone to actually learn those facts, so we can actually get to the point that it's not only about computers and it's not only about internet connection, which in fact, by the way, there was also a study in the UK where they come to the conclusion that the students with 1 more megabyte of download speed actually came higher on percentiles on their rankings in school, so they actually got better grades than other students. But that was some time ago, so might not apply today. So what I want to say is that these facts altogether will have huge consequences on students with already poor grades and poor background socioeconomic conditions. And those who don't have those conditions together will suffer more, and the inequality will greatly increase. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Diogo, do you believe that postponing the end of online schooling until the spring break was a good idea? Do you think that students will have a lower performance this year because of it?
I think in data has, like Danielle said, data has been showing that uh, there are already losses. So it's not. I think that the marginal cost of those 2 weeks or something um, of the postponement. I don't think the marginal cost is that high, but the truth is that students have been losing, and the country has been, in countries in general, have been losing for a long time since the first lockdown, and not just from now. So I think that this cumulative effect will, in fact, take a toll. And Danielle was saying that we're not really sure about numbers for Portugal, but in fact, I found a study or an article that estimated a 3% decrease in lifetime income for students with ages 5 through 18 in September 2020 if their performance had returned immediately to pre-crisis values. So if in September 2020 everyone went back to learning like in 2019, then the loss would be 3% of lifetime income. Only higher when in fact schools didn't go back to normal in September, and they're still not back to normal, and the return to normal is being postponed. So I think that the marginal effect isn't that big, but of course, as long as we're still at home, and as long as this online version is going on, losses for one's lifetime income and for GDP of a country as a whole will for sure take a toll.
Okay, thank you, Diogo. Inês, if you were in a position of power and you had the chance to change one characteristic about this term of online schooling, what would you change?
So I do believe that the preparation for this third wave was better than for the first one, and of course that had to be. But we still have to bear in mind, and Danielle pointed that out, that in the country we have a lot of inequality between students, and I believe that the government should have searched on that matter better and should have been more prepared to try to minimize the impact that this has on these students that are being left behind. And I mean, to see villages in Portugal that don't have a good internet connection and students going to bizarre places to have classes, and even in major cities we have a lot of students that don't have the conditions that they need to have normal classes and to study in a normal way. So I do believe that, for example, if the government had opened the libraries and study spaces that have computers to be used and have internet access and a calm environment, that could have been a good measure to try to minimize this impact. Of course, there are many more, but it's one thing that I would do.
Since its foundation, TAP, a Portuguese airline, has switched from being a public good to a public company to a private company and back again to a company majorly held by the Portuguese state. The pandemic period has been rough for the airline, which saw its air traffic decrease by more than 90%. A new restructuring plan is currently being discussed with the Directorate General for Competition of the European Commission. The restructuring plan presented to the DG implies almost 2,000 employees being fired.
Inês, in your opinion, what was the most important characteristic for TAP's need for restructuring? Was it the macroeconomic factors from the pandemic, or was it individual factors from the company?
So in 2015, TAP was privatized, and in that year the company began a restructuring plan that implied a lot of investment in new planes, in new routes, and that basically tried to put TAP in a more competitive and modernized place. So to do that, they needed a lot of money, and they accumulated a lot of debt throughout these years. And year on year they presented only losses. So of course the future looked different from what it does now, but we couldn't say that TAP was a strong firm. It wasn't healthy at all. And so of course when COVID came unexpectedly, it struck the airline company really bad. Of course it struck every airline, but for TAP especially, that was in such a bad place and underperforming, the company was basically bankrupt, and it needed the government in order to live and to survive. So in 2020, the majority of TAP went back to the hands of the government, and a plan is being now voted in Brussels in order to make this company live. So in my opinion, of course, the pandemic had that huge unexpected impact that brought the bankruptcy of TAP. But I do think that if the company wasn't in such a bad place previous to the pandemic, maybe things would have gone differently, and the company could get out of this place in a more healthy way than from the way things are being held now.
Okay, so Inês, do you believe that is it a fair argument to say that the worst part was the timing when the pandemic hit, because TAP was in a restructuring period, they were having losses because of the investment? If the pandemic happened 20 years from now, do you believe that TAP's reaction, the financial reaction of TAP, would be the same?
I mean, that is difficult to answer because we don't know where we could have been where it could be 20 years from now. But I do think that every company, and especially a company that has such a big importance for Portugal and for the country as a whole, should be more prepared for catastrophes like this one, and should be healthy, because or this is being discussed, but I mean, a lot of people argue that we shouldn't let TAP die. So if the company has such a big importance, and if the company deserves to be saved like it is right now, like the big injection that the company is receiving in the next few years, maybe the management of the company should be done in a different way and in a more safe way, of course.
Okay, thank you, Inês. Diogo, do you believe that the end of the pandemic will bring financial stability back to TAP? Or do you think that this financial harm from the pandemic period will bleed out for the next few years?
I think two things. First of all, regarding what Inês was saying, I think that we have to be a bit cautious when we say that. Of course, the TAP has a whole story to it, but I think that we should be a bit cautious when you say that they were underperforming in a period of investment, right? Because it's normal for companies to have losses during the first years of investment, because they're just they undertook a great financial burden and they're having to repay them, and the investment might have not kicked in already in terms of returns in terms of returns. Now, in terms of financial stability in the future, I think that it was more like the whole shock of the pandemic was systemic, right? So we're talking about a shock that was kind of similar to all the tourism related activities to some extent. So I think that given its systemic nature, the systemic nature of the shock, given the fact that TAP is regarded as a strategic company for the country, and given that it is backed up by the government, I don't think that it will fall, or I don't think that it will go down that easily, unless the government decides to just destroy TAP and return with a new flag company. But I do want to leave a question that's like, is this dependency or this constant help from the country, from the government, the state government, creating some kind of loop in terms of creating or guaranteeing a lender of last resort for any public company that is having troubles? Are we going to be endlessly paying for companies that are underperforming or that are struggling? Is this the precedent that the government is setting? I think that's a good question to leave in here.
Diogo, and that question also relates to what happened during the sovereign debt crisis with the banking sector, right?
Exactly. It was exactly the thing that I thought of when I thought of the lender of last resort, right? So you're creating just someone that will back everything up. And in the financial crisis, it was good because there was a crisis of confidence, right? And in this case, it could also be good in that sense, and I don't doubt that. But when we're looking at a situation in which the whole helping hand from the government has been ongoing, right? It isn't something that has just happened for the pandemic crisis. It's something that we've heard of for a lot of years now. I think that's when we should be worried.
Okay, thank you, Diogo. Daniel, the government is planning to inject an urgent 200 million euros in the company for treasury reasons. What do you think will be the public reaction, the public perception of this money injection during a time where the income of a lot of Portuguese citizens has been shrunk by the pandemic?
Well, given by what Inês and Diogo already said, and what I also thought before, I think that regardless of the pandemic, the public reaction would always be negative, because overall, people will never ever be completely satisfied to where the government money will be used. That being in health, education, and this subject becomes even more controversial when it's on firms that don't belong to those two sectors, because it's not, many people might not see it as necessary. Well, this negative point of view only escalates during this pandemic. So the top conversation is not from 2020. It's been around for a couple of years now. So, and as Diogo mentioned, previously, the government has already been on the sides of many people on other topics, on other firms, when they invest their money on other firms. So, all in all, I think it will always be a negative approach by the public. This escalates even further when their income actually is getting unstable and many people are not feeling secure.
This marks the end of our episode. Thank you so much for participating.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and on YouTube as Nova Economics Club, and follow the podcast Connected on Spotify. See you next month.